so expedient past offense, that in from the innocent would wish themselves like me, when with such crime they such repentance see.
Hello, the soprano Emma Kirkby, who has recently been made a dame, is an icon, perhaps the icon, of early music, which is basically the 600 years of works written before the death of J.S. Bach in 1750. Emma Kirkby is unique for her purity of tone and her ability to convey words and ideas from music that, without her, might otherwise have been forgotten. Although her voice is smaller in comparison to her operatic counterparts, the way she uses it has had a big impact on the very art of singing. It's no surprise that a recent poll included her as one of the top 20 sopranos of all time. Not bad for someone who never set out to be a professional singer. But once discovered, there's been no stopping her curiosity and enthusiasm for music that ranges from medieval plain chant to the high baroque of the 18th century.
She is the perfect non-diva, I have to say, and none of the nose-in-the-air diva presentation. Emma has no hang-ups about the way she is treated or the glorification, the pedestal for the singer.
Excuse me. Let's try that. It's just what length is my same?
She's an instrument for transmitting ideas, and her ideas are extremely well worked out.
And they can make it short afterwards.
The words come first, and the music is the vehicle. This is why with Emma there is no change between her speaking voice and her singing voice.
Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made, those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. See him sourly ring his bell, hark, now I hear them, hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell, ding dong bell.
Now, early music is like saying the Middle Ages or the Middle Ages plus. Can you give us some idea of the main staging points of early music that have interested you?
Well, when I was a teenager was the first time I was aware there was an area of music that excited me that I knew nothing about, and that was actually singing William Byrd, aged about 14, Byrd 4-part mass with 4 voices, and it was amazing. I hadn't come across polyphony as such before, I don't think. It starts with the idea of the choiring of angels, of the interweaving lines. They really were consciously imitating the choiring of angels by then. Angels don't have to breathe. They don't have lungs, but humans do, and so you have this interweaving of the lines. Everyone takes breaths at different moments and you're not aware of it because of the other lines continuing. And that thrilled me. I think polyphony is where I really feel at home.
You'd done what could be called fairly serious singing at your school, at public school at Sherborne, hadn't you?
Well, mainly in the madrigal group, which was great. Yes, I mean that's what started me off on that sort of singing. But we didn't have individual singing lessons at the school then, and I'm not sorry about this. I don't think it did me any harm just to be singing, fitting in with other people and not really worrying so much about my own sound until later. I quite liked that. I didn't think of myself as a solo singer. I just sang.
Emma's approach to singing has been thoroughly individualistic. She has done what has been right for her and her instrument. And what she's therefore done for the rest of us, for those of us who've come since, has been to enable us to embrace our own individuality and still be successful as singers. I know I wouldn't have a career if it hadn't been for the pioneering path that she's paved.
You've said somewhere that you thought if you'd gone to music college it wouldn't have done you much good.
I think that's right at that point, yes, because there was no interest really in that size of voice or in this repertoire, and I would have been, if I'd got there at all, they'd have said, oh well, nice little voice, you can do the odd soubrette part, but I wouldn't have been very interested in that repertoire, I don't think.
You went to Oxford to read classics. Mm-hmm. Obviously you enjoyed it.
Oh, I loved it, yes, yes, especially the literature. I mean, that's what I really enjoyed. And I loved the languages, but I sang all the time in between. And the second half was philosophy and ancient history, which I'd always thought it might not suit me quite so well. I wasn't a historian, I wasn't a philosopher really, and that gave me an excuse, in a sense, to do more singing. I was getting so keen by then on the other things. It was quite convenient that it worked out that way.
At that time, Oxford University was the centre of the burgeoning early music movement. Scholars and musicians alike were rediscovering lesser-known composers from the 16th and 17th centuries. They wanted to make their performances sound as authentic as possible.
People were becoming more aware of the repertoire that was there, the recordings were starting. There was new activity, there were new sounds no one had really heard before, and it was very exciting.
But still, even after Oxford, you felt that your career, your life was not going to be that of a singer. You became a teacher.
Oh, it never crossed my mind I'd be a singer. I mean, still, there was no possible professional opportunity that I didn't even look. I had a sort of vague dream that when I'd been a teacher for a bit, I might go to London and sing madrigals. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if anyone would pay me to do it. I just imagined it as a sort of sabbatical I might give myself, I think.
Was this consequent on meeting Anthony Rood?
Yes, that was the real catalyst. And he was looking for a soprano for his projects. He had the other voices by then.
I was always interested in the underdog, the forgotten voice. I listened to the sopranos who were working around 1972, 73, and they had such wide wobbles at the time. And I couldn't hear the language they were singing, never mind specific words. And it really wasn't the kind of sound I was looking for. I was really despairing. We were coming up to the first recording sessions, and I heard Emma singing in one of the college choirs in Oxford. And I heard this sound at the top of the choir. And I thought, that is the sound we need for the ensemble.
And then after this concert, he rang 2 days later saying, "I've found my soprano now." And I said, "Oh, good, who is she?" And he said, "You." And I said, "You're mad, you can't mean this." He said, "Yeah, I've heard the sound." And I said, "Well, I haven't got a technique." He said, "Well, you better get one."
From the first session, when we first started rehearsing, it was a sound that was distinctive. And it woke everybody up. Not all of the singers that she sang with were equally pleased. They thought I'd brought in this amateur and that she hadn't the training that was needed. And in fact, to Emma's dues, she went out and got herself her singing lessons immediately.
So I found myself a teacher, and that was Jessica Cash. The first lesson I had, I took her something I knew I couldn't do, which was a very simple chorale melody in a Bach cantata. There was fast aria later on that went quite flashily and with lots of little notes, and that was all right, but I couldn't string two notes together. And I said, "I'm really sorry, I'm afraid my voice is a bit tight." And she said, "No, it's one of the looser voices I've met. You're the one that's tight." So that's the technique that I needed, was how to use my instrument, how to relate to it better with my body, really.
I mean, I think people are quite fascinated by technique, thinking it's the key to the door. Can you give us a specific example? It's you that's tight, not the boy, and so on. What are we talking about? How did she, that bit you couldn't sing, so you took yours, "I can't sing this." Now then, what did she say? How did she teach you to sing it?
We'd spent most of the time actually working out how to start, working out the very beginning, how you actually just hit the first note, what happens there, because my brain was going 90 to the dozen. You know, it was working so hard that it was stopping my body getting involved. So what she was trying to do was slow me down, in a sense, and get me to trust my voice.
Blame not my lute, for he must sound of this or that as liketh me. For lack of wit, the lute is bound to give such tunes as pleaseth me. Though my songs be somewhat strange, and speak such words as touch thy change, blame not my lute.
Did the fact that you were singing to a lute help you? Did you find that?
I think it helped me hugely, yes.
In what way?
Well, firstly, as I say, there's never any need you're never having to strive to be heard. In fact, the opposite, if anything. What you have to get used to is the fact that you can't hide anything. It's absolutely exposing. The tiniest thing will show. That's the joy of it. It is very dangerous, but it's also very satisfying.
Farewell unknown, for though thou break my strings in spite with great disdain, yet have I found out for thy sake strings for to string my lute again. And if perchance this foolish rhyme do make thee blush at any time, blame
With her singing career now firmly established, Emma Kirkby's pure voice attracted people who wanted to discover new aspects of old favourites. In the 70s you also caught the attention of Christopher Hogwood, who was doing great things in early music. What did you do with him that, as it were, took your career on?
Messiah was the big break, really. And then I was lucky because Christopher chose a version from, I think it was 1752 or 3, which Handel did specially for the Foundling Hospital.
What we chose to do for our recording was one of the best documented, but the last version that Handel left to the Foundling Hospital in London. It involved having 2 sopranos who divvied up the work between them. And also, surprisingly, there were some transpositions of well-known numbers, in particular the Refiner's Fire, which in the Foundling Hospital only is pitched a tone higher than it is in any other Handel version. So, of course, it gets into very squeaky territory. It was for that and a few other arias given to that singer that Emma took that part.
I was given But Who May Abide, Thou Art Gone Up, and If God Be For Us, which are not so well known, which was lovely for me because I didn't have to worry about matching up to anybody else's version. You know, it's very, very helpful, I think, if you can be on relatively virgin territory for something.
Emma Kirkby has very distinctive looks, which are very natural and by some convenient fluke happen to make her look rather like a Piero della Francesca angel, which is very useful if you're going to sing music from that period, I think. In fact, there's a picture of the Nativity by Piero della Francesca, which has 4 or 5 Emma Kirkbys all playing their lutes. It's really very, very clever of her to acquire this look.
During the 70s and 80s, Emma Kirkby recorded and collaborated with an ever-growing number of ensembles that specialised in Renaissance and Baroque repertoire. She became the popular face of early music.
Most people thought music began with Bach and Handel, and the idea of something earlier was rather like going back to the plough and really not to be bothered with. But in the early 80s, she became a sort of figurehead for that music. And you knew that if Emma Kirkby was singing the music of someone you'd never heard of, you could have a pretty good guess what kind of music it might be, because she made it her own.
Il est vrai qu'elle n'attendra pas, qu'il faudrait n'avoir point Dieu pour ne l'aimer pas. Il est vrai qu'elle n'attendra pas, qu'il faudrait n'avoir point Dieu pour ne l'aimer pas. Aussi je dois bénir les dieux qui m'ont défendu les traits de ses yeux. Pour moi je veux bénir les dieux qui m'ont défendu les traits de ses yeux. Sa beauté peut tout enflammer, même un dieu en la voyant la voudrait aimer. Sa beauté peut tout enflammer, même un dieu en la voyant la voudrait aimer. Pour moi je veux bénir les dieux qui m'ont défendu des traits de ses yeux. Pour moi je veux bénir les dieux qui m'ont défendu des traits de ses yeux.
What you were doing had not been done on any with that intensity before. It was new. It was coming up. There was quite a lot of opposition to it, and people weren't always entirely complimentary.
No, well, it still is, I think. Yes, I mean, voices. It's a very subjective business. People really get very passionate about what they feel about voices. And yes, some people said it was ridiculous, it was starved, it was dull.
Alfred Teller, the countertenor, described it as vegetarian. I mean, they...
Yes, most music for vegetarians, they said. Yes, that's right. The bad reviews are the ones that really stick in the mind, aren't they? The ones you remember. And somebody said, listening to Emma Kirkby sing is about as interesting as an entire meal of plain yoghurt. So that went into the sort of, into our world after that. A bit more yoghurt here, please.
I mean, it doesn't matter now, but did that hurt at the time?
I mean, every bad review's got a grain of truth in it, so it's worth looking for that. There will be something. I mean, you don't start fully, you don't spring fully armed from the thigh of Zeus, do you? You take a while getting yourself sorted. And I was acutely aware of things that weren't right yet. I was hugely enjoying myself, but it wasn't what I really felt that I was capable of yet. It takes a long time.
Even today, the quality of Emma Kirkby's voice provokes debate. Although in a poll this year she was voted one of the top 20 greatest sopranos of all time, some questioned whether she should have been included at all.
Most great singers have excelled or become known in later repertoire because that tends to be operatic. The great thing about opera is that it demands acrobatics, and nothing people love more than to see high wire activity. Most of these singers who do specialise in the later repertoire could not sing what she sings because it requires a denial of ego in the way the voice is produced.
Do you think the idea of having to throw your voice over a 90-piece orchestra to the back of a 3,000-seater hall, well, it did. How did it change the voice?
The really big voices, they can be used quite simply. But I think the ones that are a little bit smaller, if they want to get past the competition, they have to find a way of amplifying that. And they add vibrato. That's the first thing they usually do.
Add vibrato, yeah.
Yes, and just as an amplifying device. And they use their whole bodies as they work harder than I usually do to make a sound. It's sort of ah! Instead of just normal speaking level. And that kind of shock sound, you get that and you catch that and you run with it, and you sustain this amazing line, which is very, very much louder than you would ever think of as a speaking sound. It's more of a declaiming, shouting sound, if you like.
I mean, you must know much more about opera than I do, but when I go to the opera, not always, but sometimes I'm very, very impressed by the voices, and sometimes I just find them uncomfortably strained. And obviously they're unnatural in the sense of we have natural speaking voices, but the lack of naturalness is taking away any sort of feeling that I think they're bringing to the part.
Well, I sort of wonder about the time of Verdi and Puccini themselves, whether people would need to be quite so loud as they are now. If you look sort of Renaissance sources, there's a certain appreciation of what they called still voices, still sounds, and that meant gentle.
What's
that meant quieter,
yeah.
And that was quite appreciated.
Emma Kirkby's success in bringing Renaissance music to a wider audience encouraged musicians to look even further back in time for inspiration. In 1982 she joined forces with Gothic Voices to record works by the first ever accredited female composer, the 12th century abbess Hildegard Von Bingen. It was an enormous and immediate success. What took you to music by Hildegard of Bingen? We're in a church that has a 12th century foundation and part still here, which is the time in which she lived. And she was, certainly to me, to most people, completely unknown, but turns out to have been a very, very fine musician, a big figure in medieval culture,
indeed,
if we can use that word
yes,
for then,
indeed.
and brought up by nuns by the side of a monastery, herself then becoming an abbess and then devoting herself to music. So there's a romantic story about her. What qualities do you think the music has that caught people's imagination and affection?
There's just a rapture in it. You can't really resist it. These soaring melodies, it starts off quite simply and then it just builds and builds and builds with such simple means. It's just a voice and then maybe a group of voices answering. And we had, for some of the tracks, the hurdy-gurdy playing, which does give a wonderful foundation to it. It somehow is something wonderful then for the voices to sing against. The words are very beautiful. They are very colourful, very elaborate. I mean, she's not just talking about Maximin celebrating the Mass. She says he's swift as a hart going to the water brooks. He's celebrating the stone of the altar. He's luminous. I mean, it's incredibly graphic stuff. It's almost cinematic the way she's describing it. you are absolutely together.
Emma Kirkby's reputation as an interpreter of early repertoire has made her a sought-after teacher at home and abroad. Earlier this year, she explored the Renaissance madrigals of the Italian composer Monteverdi with amateur singers in Udine, northern Italy. What were you trying to do when you were taking coals to Newcastle or coaching Italians in Monteverdi?
Well, yes, I went with the Consort of Music a lot in the 80s and 90s and did courses. And these young Italians came, and when we were on these courses, but even more when we did concerts elsewhere, we were often mobbed afterwards by young singers saying, where can we learn to sing like this? We have nothing but canto lirico in Italy. Now, canto lirico means getting a really, really wonderful big voice going such that we don't really hear the words anymore. Words aren't important. And when these singers came along saying, we want to sing like you do these madrigals because we really would like to sing that way, and our teachers don't understand that way, they don't want us to do this repertoire, how can we find out what to do? That was when we started doing courses and encouraging people. Non si apre alla fronte. It doesn't open this way. It stays here. Co. Ecco. Così. Ecco. Okay, you? My excuse for coming and telling Italians how to sing their music is that I'm not telling them how to speak Italian, but I'm begging them to sing it as they speak it. I say to them, okay, read me the text, and they read it beautifully, and I say, well, now sing it. Where's it gone? Where has the sense of the text gone? You're not speaking now. It's amazing how when people sing, they change everything. They distort the vowels. They get into all sorts of strange habits. And it's very basic, what I'm offering in a way. It's just to appreciate, get them to appreciate what they have and trust it when they sing. Okay, shall we just try from O Felice, solo parlando, ma nelle ritme che ha scritto Monteverdi. So, O Felice, O Felice, O Felice, O Felice, uccelletto, come nel tuo diletto, ti ricompensa bella l'alma natura, se ti nego saper. Okay, yeah, that's great. And the O Felice, especially listen to Gudrun. O Felice, she's really talking. Yeah, she says something. So be careful when we get to se ti nego saper. It's become a little bit sort of. Se ti nego saper, ti die ventura. Ti die ventura. No, that's brilliant. That's perfect. Really. No, that is so good. That's exactly what you should do. This weekend is quite special and unusual for me because the pieces were not chosen by me but by the choral director who was the host here, and so they've constructed a concert. We had to know it was going to work, and I'm happy to say that everything we've heard is good enough and it's going to be a very entertaining concert.
cambiato la storia della musica italiana. È stato il primo con la seconda pratica che ha cominciato a pensare alla teatralità e all'importanza della parola prima della musica sul testo. E nonostante siano passati molti anni è interessante ancora studiare questo autore che nasconde sempre un interesse e 1000 segreti ancora inesplorati. Credo che Emma molti li abbia capiti ed è stato particolarmente interessante vedere come lei in questi 3 giorni ci abbia addirittura insegnato la pronuncia italiana, che è abbastanza singolare.
Are you rather surprised that what started out with you and 2 or 3 of your friends as something you enjoyed doing because you wanted to do it has now grown considerably? In many ways you've made over 300 recordings with Anthony Rulli alone. You're voted one of the best soprano singers. I know to embarrass you. What do you think of it?
I'm delighted that more people love it. I think when we started making the recordings of the unknown, the untrodden paths that Anthony's so good at finding, people like Jacques de Wert's madrigals, Dowland's songs, and it was heaven. I absolutely loved it.
John Dowland is particularly associated with the lute. Can you tell us a little about him and why you like singing his songs?
Through his 4 books, about 80-something, just under 90 songs in all, they are astonishing, and I have to say, whenever you get back to him from singing almost anybody else, you do feel a certain frisson that you're in the company of someone really special.
Sorrow, sorrow, stay. Lend true repentant tears to a woeful, wretched wight. Hence, despair with thy tormenting fears. Do not, oh, do not my heart, poor heart, affright. Pity, 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 help now or never. Mark me not to endless pain, mark me not to endless pain.
Dowland was a bit of an enigma. Some people think he was a melancholic, but this is fin de siècle stuff. It's around 1600. It's a time when melancholy was a really artistically fashionable thing to explore. Everyone was really into melancholy, and Dowland's songs are incredibly moving, and despair is something you cannot get rid of, and hope is something you must not even hope to get, and you will not get any pity from anyone. I mean, it's as grim as it could possibly get. And then it's got this amazing falling, down, 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 I fall, arise, I never shall. And yet it is one of the favourite songs. When people hear it, they just say, God, that's a good song.
No help, no
It's a ridiculous question, but from Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century to Bach in the 18th century, what would you say, if any, are the common features to the music you sing across those 600 years?
I suppose it's words, actually. Yes, as far as Bach, it's definitely words, I think.
What do you mean by that?
Well, just that the text is supreme. The text is what matters more than anything. And the text is important because it's the word of God. I mean, that was their fundamental starting point.
Associated with prayer.
Yes, yes. I've got a sort of sense that some of my most devoted fans, I think of them a bit like wine buffs who really love the Beaujolais from a particular slope. You know, when everyone starts buying that Beaujolais, I think some of them will lose interest and they'll go and find something else. You know, I think there's that side of it as well. I think if I became a really household name, it would put some people off. So I'm very happy not to be.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.